Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining our SATSA webinar in partnership with Bidvest Bank and Canada Asset Managers. My name is Natalia Rosa and I'll be handling the tech behind the scenes today. Joining me today, I'm pleased to have Bidvest Bank, which has been one of SATSA's sponsors for many years. They are an entrepreneurial bank that has changed the way people and companies do business. Running a business is challenging enough, however, and the current pandemic commands that you have a bank with a personal touch, one that chooses to partner in your successes. Whether you're looking for business banking, personal banking, or fleet solutions, Bidvest Bank's boutique range of offers will help you and your business thrive. Just a bit of housekeeping before we begin, although I know many of you have been on many of these. Our Q&A is open throughout the session. If you have a question, please paste your question in that Q&A folder, not in the chat. The chat is open, however, so please do let us know where you're connecting from, as Liesel has done. Thank you, Liesel. And we will also be recording this webinar and distributing that recording in case you'd like to view it or would like to pass it on to a colleague. On that note, allow me to introduce our MC for the webinar, Renier Mankies. He's the Regional Head Inland and KZN at Bidvest Bank. Renier, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Natalia. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to exploring today's topic, getting your business through COVID-19 and beyond. We know that business environment is unpredictable, but now more than ever, business has had to manage and adjust to a new normal due to the COVID-19 global pandemic. The severity of disruptions to businesses, consumers, governments has made us all rethink the way we do business. So the question is, what can we do to prepare? Not just to get through the current COVID-19 pandemic, but come out better and stronger than ever. This is what we are here to discuss today. We will also elaborate on the government-backed loans and how Bidvest Bank can assist you. Without further ado, I introduce to you Dr. Adrian Saville. Adrian is the Chief Executive of Canada Asset Managers, a wholly owned subsidiary of the Bidvest Group. Adrian founded Canada Asset Managers in 1998 as an independent investment house. Adrian also serves as Professor of Economics, Finance and Strategy at the Gordon Institute of Business Science. As always, it's great having you here today with us, Adrian. Over to you.
Thanks, Renier. Thanks for the introduction. Natalia, thanks for hosting us here and making sure that this all happens. I'm going to jump straight into to the discussion and talk you through the context and the implications for business. Many of these are already self-evident and being felt deeply, and I'm speaking to an industry that has experienced the brunt of the COVID-19 impact. My ambition, my intention through this conversation is much like a relationship that is in stress. It doesn't help to skirt around issues or pretend problems away. We have to square up to the reality and the circumstances. And I'm going to share with you the experiences from other companies, other industries, and other countries to give you some cases and perspective and evidence of ways in which countries, companies, and industries have navigated and negotiated. And against that backdrop, perhaps use some of the experiences and learnings to engineer our own solutions. So I've called this, building for restart and recovery. There's a lot of talk about the alcohol ban being lifted. We know that in some parts of the world, the travel industry has started to kick back in, and that air traffic data from the country that went first in is showing slow evidence of thawing, and I'll share some of that data from China with you in a moment. Before we speak about industry specifics, I want to share this chart with you, and it shows you the relationship between world economic growth, which is the gray column, and the blue line is the bottom line performance of all companies that make up the MSCI All World Index. The MSCI All World Index has 2,000 of the world's largest companies. And what the evidence or what this data points to is not quite a one-to-one relationship, but a very strong relationship between world economic growth and company performance. And if you're going to wish for one thing to help business performance, wish for an economy. Bill Clinton's advisor, James Carville, says it's the economy, stupid. That's what he sort of went around Clinton's election tour promoting or provoking, that if you want to get one thing right, make sure that it's the economy. And we don't need much evidence or argument at this point of the COVID-19 pandemic to have a deep appreciation of just how important the economy is. So in this global data, let me find my highlighter, give me a second. In this global data, we've got world GDP likely to shrink by about 5% in 2020. And read against the right-hand axis, the blue line tells you that the 2,000 largest companies on average are likely to experience something like a 60% earnings decline. This is a harrowing decline, and the overused term now is unprecedented. We haven't seen this type of economic slowdown or company shutdown in modern economic history. South Africa has little immunity to this, and I'm sharing with you now South Africa's economic growth. It's the same thing, it's the gray column, and the thin line is the bottom line performance of the JSE's all share index. So these are the 160 largest companies listed in South Africa. The economic growth story for South Africa, it looks like we're going to go into a year which will deliver -10 economic growth. And with that, the impact on company performance is a -35% profit performance for the JSE's largest 160 companies. If the South African economy is going down 10, whereas the world economy is going down 5, how can it be that South African companies are only experiencing a 30 or 40% decline in earnings, whereas the world's largest 2,000 companies are experiencing a 60% decline? And to some extent, the JSE has sheltering and protection in the rand dollar effect, in our commodity footprint, which is still quite pronounced on the JSE, and through what I've called the NASPERS effect. So the rand dollar points to the fact that many JSE listed companies, although they are listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, are earning dollars and reporting in rands. British American Tobacco would be a case in point. And yes, it's a global company that has navigated the ban on local tobacco relatively well. Commodities points to the fact that a number of JSE listed companies are commodity exporters, and it won't be lost on you with the gold price booming that some parts of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange are participating in that very big gold price recovery. And then the NASPERS effect references the fact that even though the company is listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, it has almost no business in South Africa. And the case here is NASPERS, which is delivering earnings from China. Dressed up in any way, though, what it doesn't escape is the reality that the impact of this -10 economic shrinkage is having on South African businesses. Edcon, the Edgar's parent, is in rescue. Pumalela, the horse racing business, in business rescue. South African Airways in business rescue. Group 5 in business rescue. Some were already headed this way. So Group 5, for instance, was already headed to business rescue before COVID-19 impacted. Some had a chance of shuffling through Pumalela, and others, this was an ice bucket being poured on them at a time of economic sensitivity. EdCon or associated media would be cases in point. And if we take the analysis then from the country level, -10 economic growth, and the company level, business rescue or a sharp decline in earnings, and instead talk about the thing in between, industry, how are different industries doing in COVID-19? Now I'm speaking to the converted. People in leisure, tourism, services, retail, travel have experienced the sharpest edge of the COVID-19 economic and business impact. That, to some extent, is evidenced by the colors of these pie charts, which are talking about COVID-19 at different industry levels. So, energy, services, retail, and so on. And different ways in which COVID-19 is impacting, whether it's on revenue, operations, people, your supply chain. And if you've got a colored in pie chart, it means that the impacts are deepest. And on the far right-hand side, we've got the travel, transportation, tourism sector, where every single pie chart is colored in the darkest. So the members of SATSA are likely to have experienced the sharpest edge of COVID-19 pandemic. And although the talk now is about the economic recovery and is it going to be L-shaped or U-shaped or W-shaped, I'm going to make a couple of points in passing. So the first is we are speaking to a part of the economy that has experienced the severest impact. Whether the recovery is L-shaped or U-shaped or W-shaped, for South Africa, it is likely to be slow. And I'm not sure that we have yet seen the deepest part of that impact, because South Africa is still in the business of going through the COVID-19 convulsions. And to be, so that I'm not being sort of veiled in my references, explicitly, this is retrenchments. The unemployment numbers that are being bandied around point to anything between 1.5 million and 5 million jobs lost. How could the number be so wide? Well, it really is whether we are referencing formal sector unemployment or economy-wide unemployment, which would include informal sector. And the biggest informal sector unemployment estimates point to 1.5 million jobs lost. To put that into context, in global financial crisis, we lost 1 million jobs. So this is much bigger than global financial crisis. And in global financial crisis, it was overwhelmingly formal sector jobs that were lost, not informal sector jobs. In fact, the informal sector managed to come through in reasonably good shape, global financial crisis. However, with lockdown, social distancing, the entire freezing of supply chains, it means that this has quickly spilled over into the informal sector. And Ruth Hall of PLAS estimates that as many as 5 million jobs could be lost economy-wide. And that point puts us at a 45% unemployment rate by the end of this year. We came into 2020 with a 30% unemployment rate. We finished the year with a 45% unemployment rate. And we can use the word then again, unprecedented. We haven't been into this territory. It's likely that the economy starts to show signs of recovery. And the data that I'm showing you here is the extent of the COVID-19 policy stimulus packages brought by a range of economies: Germany, Japan, France, the UK, the US. And I want you to pay attention to at least two attributes. The first is the height of the columns, and the the taller column in every country case is COVID-19. The solid column is the global financial crisis response. So by every country measure, the policy response absolutely towers over global financial crisis. So point one is policymakers have been fierce in their response to COVID-19. The second is that this is economy global, that it is not one economy, the US or Germany responding. It is a coordinated response. Germany all the way through to India, and South Africa is included in that. The size of South Africa's policy response, about 10% of GDP. So it's a fierce and very determined policy response. It's coordinated across countries, and it is multifaceted. It is fiscal policy, by which we mean employment packages, spending stimulus, and it is monetary, by which we mean interest rate cuts. When we talk then about the thawing that we're starting to see, the data on the left-hand side is South African retail data, and it shows you foot traffic measured by Hyprop, the listed real estate business. And in April, foot traffic through Hyprop's malls, minus 70%. In May, it was minus 40. I only have data for the beginning part of June, but this is enough evidence to suggest that we've got some recovery. What won't be lost on this audience is even if people are arriving at malls and restaurants, they are not spending in the same fashion or format. So this is foot traffic, it's not spend. What we can take more comfort from, though, is the first in, first out data. And the top is some of the largest cities in China, and it shows you recovery in activity and in spend in China. And the bottom data is Chinese air traffic. The top line is Chinese internal traffic, and the bottom line is international traffic. So international is a lagging activity, and domestic is a leading activity. So we want to, or we could bring the same indicators and barometers to the reading for the South African circumstance. I'm not sure if this is too soon, because I know that, I'm deeply respectful of the extent and the nature of impact of COVID-19 has had on lives, livelihoods, and SATSA members' businesses. But Mike Tyson says everyone has a plan till they get punched in the mouth, or to quote him more directly, everyone has a plan till they get punched in the mouth. So I hope that the humor travels. This is not to walk past the sincerity and severity of the circumstance. And Tyson is absolutely right. No one came into 2020 with a suspicion that in August we were talking about 10% shutdown, perhaps a slowdown, perhaps 5 million jobs lost, a 500 billion rescue package, and so on. No one forecast this. But this type of impact is not unprecedented. So I want to go to, in the second part of this time with you, I want to go to some company cases and some country cases. And I'm going to talk about them. And the reason for talking about them is the moment we talk about South Africa, we become very fiercely South African in our protests and our objections. And so I'm going to draw on the relationship analogy. And if we talk about relationships, when we talk about our own relationships, we lose perspective and objectivity. When we talk about other people's relationships, we are expert and we can be subjective. And it's much easier to drop emotion and to bring impartial assessment in talking about how others have navigated and negotiated this. And then if we can agree that they've done that, then we might be able to bring some of those lessons, learnings, experiences to our own circumstance. Marty Linsky, the Harvard professor, speaks about getting onto the balcony. And if you get off the dance floor and onto the balcony, you get this privilege of perspective, or this power of perspective. So my first set of principles, and there's far more data here than I can share with you in a short webinar. If anyone wants to engage afterwards, I'd welcome the opportunity. This is work that I've been involved in for the past 15 years at the business school in my capacity as professor of strategy. And it's to understand the attributes of businesses that have the ability to take what for many other circumstances would be knockout punches, and then have the capacity to navigate or negotiate through the circumstance. We call these two attributes in our work, and our work surveys more than 1,000 companies in South Africa and 5,000 companies globally. These two attributes travel under the headline banners of agility and absorption. I don't have the time to tell you the story of this extraordinary athlete, Muhammad Ali, who has both of these factors in powerful doses. Ali is known for his agility, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, that he can be in two places at once. To date, he has the highest clocked hand speed in heavyweight boxing, that in 2.5 seconds he'll land a 6-punch combination. And his foot style is called two-stepping. For every 1 step that a conventional boxer takes, Ali takes 2. And you will appreciate that these quickly correspond with business attributes. And Ali also has absorption in very high doses. How do we know that? Because he went into the rumble in the jungle, the mid-1970s fight in Kinshasa, Zaire, with George Foreman, and the bookmakers had Ali at 10-1, meaning that that the bookmakers overwhelmingly suspected that Ali was going to lose. In boxing, they say at 3-1 you should stay in bed. So they've got Ali priced at 10-1. Ali's coach, Angelo Dundee, says it's not whether you get knocked out. The only question is what round George Foreman will knock you out in. And while the fight is taking place, there is an airplane on the runway that Ali's camp doctor has arranged for him with pre-approved flight plan to the best neurosurgeon in the world. So by every measure, the world is saying Ali is not going to recover from this contest with Foreman. And this is not about glorifying boxing. It's a blood sport. It's about the strategy, the extraordinary strategy of this athlete, where in round 8, he comes off the ropes and knocks out George Foreman to recapture his world heavyweight title. And I'd be happy to share that story more fully in if we've got a bigger volume of time with your clients, with your teams, with your executive, if you want to explore this. The stories are really powerful about how businesses can build in these attributes into their DNA. So absorption is about customer centricity and customer retention. Even if your customers can't visit your facility, you can be talking to them on a regular basis, doing stuff with them, engaging with them. And agility is about figuring out ways to differentiate yourself or diversify yourself. So I'm not going to talk about the leisure industry or tourism or travel industry. I'm going to talk about a couple of others. And Nassim Taleb makes the point that to not foresee a tsunami or a crash is absolutely forgivable, but to build something fragile is not. So how do we navigate or negotiate around this? And here's my examples of a couple of other industries. My first example is the post office industry. The data that I'm showing you here is the South African Post Office versus Singapore Post. The red is Singapore Post, the gray is South African Post Office. What this tells us is on the left-hand side, the South African Post Office hasn't grown revenue since 2005. Its revenue today is approximately the same as 2005. By contrast, Singapore Post has grown its revenue by almost 4 times in an industry that has collapsed. So my reference to you could be, imagine that airline travel is banned forever. What are you going to do? Imagine that dining out is banned forever. What are you going to do? Because imagine that letter delivery is banned forever. What are you going to do? And the South African Post Office's response has been very, very anemic and unimpressive. Singapore Post, absolutely extraordinary. And here is its profitability. The red column shows you that Singapore Post is generating a return on equity of 10 and 15% per annum, whilst South African Post Office is making spectacular losses. They lost R1 billion in the most recent year. Singapore Post sees this coming. They start building servers that allow them to host email. And then in order to log into your email, you must go and visit the Singapore Post website. That website has a splash page that becomes a retail window. And in the most recent iteration, that retail window has become Alibaba, one of the world's largest e-tailers, has become their business partner. And they convert all of their Singapore post offices into Alibaba warehouses in Singapore. So if you right-click on your Singapore Post purchase order from the Singapore Post courier service, your product will be delivered within the hour in Singapore. Singapore Post is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They don't close. And that is about iteration and navigation. These are the types of company case studies that I think we can learn from in times of crisis. Lots of other crisis examples. Iwo Jima speaks about the importance of understanding your team, and that some of your most powerful collaborators could be your clients and customers who are talking to you, and that your coalface is your employees who are in warehouse or who are in storeroom or are in supply chain, learning things by doing or as they go along. They can give you real-time and live data. And on the right-hand side is my reference to the importance of teamwork and collaboration. We've experienced this type of convulsion, so I'm not speaking to you just in my sort of professorial capacity, and your objection might be, what the hell does this guy know? We've been through a couple of financial crises. I built Canon Asset Managers in the Asian and Russian crises, which were deep and protracted financial crises of the late 1990s. In the Twin Towers, we experienced a major business convulsion. And in global financial crisis, we lost 50% of our revenue in the space of weeks. And what I learned in that experience is one of your most powerful allies can be your customers. And so we went and spoke to customers about, were there ways that we could retain their business, but by doing things differently. We were absolutely brutal with our employees. And at executive level, we took 30% pay cuts. We didn't cut pay at our frontline because our frontline has the highest financial fragility. So we left their pay, but we said to them, in exchange, when things recover, it's not going to be pay increases. We're going to look after your jobs. And we put looking after jobs in place of retrenchment. We took 30% cuts, and we were absolutely brutal and honest with the way in which it was impacting our business financially. And that brought huge buy-in from our colleagues and from our clients. And it turned us into a much, much stronger business. Perversely, and in the interest of time, I'll share just one very small anecdotal example. What we learned was that you can retrench the water cooler. What you can't retrench is DSTV. So our staff were fiercely opposed to losing what actually were fairly small privileges, like having DSTV running in the background, that they could watch this, but they were comfortable going and getting water from the tap, no longer the water cooler. And this reminds me then of company cases where your iteration, your innovation can actually be very, very modest adjustments, but they can be transformative. And I love this story. This is Van Moof, which is the Dutch vehicle bicycle manufacturer. And what Van Moof is experiencing in delivery of their bicycles is overwhelming incidents of damage to the bicycles. These are expensive bicycles. If you're a cyclist, you'll know Van Moof. I mean, this is top-end equipment. And they've got prolific damage to bicycles in delivery. One of their creative directors reports, this is Beck's right, he reports that the suggestion was made, why don't we go and look at another industry where there is very low incidence in delivery damage? And they learned from surveying other industries that it was flat screen television that arrived with almost no incidence of damage. And so what they do is they put their bicycles in the same box, but they print on the cover, as you see here, a flat screen television. And the incidence of damage to delivery falls by 70 or 80%. It has a profound impact on the business, but it's a very, very modest innovation that they went and learned from, well, who else has done something like this to iterate through a circumstance. And then the second and closing case is to make the country point. There is an overwhelming anxiety that South Africa is broken. We are in deep distress, but the country is not broken. The images I show you here are from Venezuela. We are not Venezuela, which is dealing with 1,000,000% inflation. The average adult lost 10 kilograms in body mass in the depth of their crisis, and that was from hunger. South Africa is wrestling with some very, very sobering numbers. The country is distressed. The country is in crisis, but the country is not broken. South Africa has all of the attributes or aspects that allow us to recover from here, including elements like deep, established, sophisticated financial institutions and strong institutional capacity. Remember, Zuma isn't here, and it was our institutional capacity that that got us through this. Second is our neighborhood. As COVID thaws and recovers, our neighborhood will reestablish its place as the second fastest growing region in the world. Sub-Saharan Africa, for 20 years, is the second fastest growing region in the world. Kenya's skies are already open. And in the region, we have two of the world's fastest growing economies, Ethiopia and Rwanda. These are the two fastest growing economies in the world over the last 20 years. What does Ethiopia have? It is now the hub for continental transit. And what does Rwanda have? Gorillas. The Ethiopian Airlines is now building the largest airport in Africa, and it will soon have a capacity to transit 100 million passengers per annum. That means this airport is the equivalent of Heathrow in terms of annual transit. The column on the right-hand side shows you Ethiopian Airlines traffic, passenger traffic versus South African Airways. And that too is what can we learn from the other, because they've been through the exact same industrial experience, but they've come to completely different outcomes. There was an article that I shared on my Twitter link. If you want to go and find it, you'll find it under my name, Adrian Saville, and it speaks about how Ethiopian Airlines has defended revenue through COVID-19. They pulled out all of their passenger seats and they turned their planes into cargo. And they did that within the space of days. So Ethiopian Airlines has managed to stay in the skies. And then the third attribute that I'll talk about South Africa is we have a plan, and we have an extraordinary Minister of Finance who has this plan in his grip. I've been vocal on this, though. It's not just the plan. The plan needs to turn to action. And so Tito Mbowene's 77-pager speaks about the ways in which South Africa can reposition and achieve inclusive growth. I won't dress this up in any way. If I try and put lipstick on the pig, it's quickly a fraud. South Africa has to get out of the business of talking about these policies and use this COVID crisis and get into the action. In the interest of time, I was going to tell you a story about Costa Rica. I won't go there. I've already shot my time mark. So I'm going to give you this last example of iterating or innovating through crisis. One of my favorite company cases in talking to teams that are squaring up to company stress, company challenges, flexion points, industry stress, and it's Eastman Kodak versus Fujifilm. Eastman Kodak went into bankruptcy in 2012. The company is still alive and listed, but it died in 2012. So although it's listed, it hasn't survived as a single entity. It went into bankruptcy. Eastman Kodak's headcount at peak in 1988 was 143,000 employees. Today they have 5,000 employees. And their market cap went from $30 billion to $400 million. If you worked for Kodak, you lost your job. If you were invested in Kodak, you lost your money. Their biggest competitor is Fujifilm. This is Fujifilm's headcount, which is now 30,000 employees. At the same time that Kodak was 15,000 employees, Fujifilm was 15,000 employees. So Fujifilm's employee headcount is more than double over this crisis period where the film industry has been dying. And here is Fujifilm's market cap. They sit with almost record market cap. So Fujifilm is alive and well and profitable. And their most profitable year on record was 2019. What has Fujifilm done? Well, they've iterated and transitioned in a range of absolutely extraordinary ways. Photographic film businesses are chemicals businesses. They blend those chemicals to turn into unique molecules. So they've built a pharmaceutical business. They no longer transport specialty chemical to their photographic film plant. They transport specialty chemical to the foods industry. But their most impressive iteration is their cosmetics business, because photographic image is gorgeous color that stays there. And that's the same ingredient as lipstick, mascara, and a highlighter. Those are the three that I can do. And their best-selling product is Lift, which is a collagen drink. It takes 10 years off your appearance. What on earth is collagen? It's the primary ingredient into photographic film. And so Lift is now the primary profit center of what used to be a photographic film business. Let me stop there. I hope that is cause for courage, conviction, and some ideas and arguments about how you might be able to find ways through what is the toughest times we have found ourselves in modern history. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Adrian. Really appreciate it. As always, very insightful and a lot of food for thought. I think before we go into some of the questions, one specific question from my side is, and I actually wanted to use it in my intro, but I wasn't sure, couldn't remember exact figures from the last webinar we had. You mentioned at a previous webinar that Spain has got a population of 15 million people, but they've got visitors of around 80 million people coming through there on a yearly basis.
You paid attention.
So just from their travel industry versus our travel industry, is there any comparison there?
If anything, the economic impact on Spain is substantially greater than the impact on South Africa. I mean, I happened to be in Spain in December, January, and it is unmistakable that this is overwhelmingly a services tourist-oriented economy. So their impacts have been substantially deeper, and it is a retail tourist rather than a corporate tourist. But the lessons from Spain, I think one of the most important, there's a There's a recent McKinsey paper that has been published on ways in which the tourism industry can navigate or negotiate this. Spain, along with other parts of Europe, has arguably tried to open up too quickly and has not squared up to the importance of ensuring that you've got systems and processes that give the travel customer the confidence they need to know that your system has put them right at the front. And if anything, Spain has tried to move too quickly, that they could have spent time sort of reflecting and digesting. And one of the best places to reflect and digest is with your coalface. Speak to your customer-facing personnel, your front desk, because they know the anxieties, the sensitivities, the vulnerabilities of your tourists, for instance.
Thank you. I've got a question here. You spoke around the V, the W, the L-shaped recovery. How do you see the travel economy recovery? Will it take the same shape? Will it lag? What's your view on that?
I think it's fair to argue that travel is a lag indicator. That before people think about, where am I going to go on holiday, for instance, they're going to first worry about personal finances. And that makes travel a lag indicator rather than a leading indicator. The research that we've interrogated and explored in terms of ways in which the industry, the travel part of the industry, might iterate is, I think that this is a reinvention of the way in which people travel. So it might be that there is a far greater emphasis on quality of experience rather than the extent of the experience, the nature of the experience, and that early data from Germany suggests that the big market recovery is internal travel, that it's domestic tourism, domestic travel, that is the quick restarter. So finding ways to bring your domestic market back to life quickest. But I think you have to do this on a case-by-case basis, and it's tricky to speak to an entire industry acknowledging that this is companies of very different sizes and positioned at different points in the travel industry. But perhaps those are two headline indicators that are helpful. It's a lag indicator, and that in that lag indicator, the lead is going to be domestic rather than global.
Follow up on that then. So you say people will be considering more saving than actually using money to go and travel. Is that both for inbound and outbound? So what I'm trying to get to is, will that affect inbound travel, people, America, Europe, having the same approach as people from South Africa? Or is that specifically from a South African perspective where you think international travel will be lower?
Again, I think you have to take this on a case-by-case basis. We know from Britain that they're quite keen to travel quickly. So the pound could be your greatest ally here. So just as I've made observations about thinking about our own industry on a case-by-case basis, I think we have to look to countries on a case-by-case basis. So Britain wants to travel, the Germans want to stay at home. And they are quite comfortable holidaying at home. But the ability to reinvent here also is, are there things that we could do that reposition us entirely differently? So if people are anxious about travel, what parts of the travel journey make the most anxious? It's not the car to the airport, it's the time in the airport. Are there ways in which, as an industry, as a collective, we could reposition that? And then are there ways that we could present South Africa as a country that stands head and shoulders above the others in terms of finding ways to host tourism, that we are one of the safest places to come? We already have an established medical tourism industry, for instance. Could we collaborate there? So this is all about positioning and repositioning, I think.
If you don't mind, I'm going to put you on the spot there a bit, because you've mentioned a few things there. If it was you, if it was your business, what would be your like silver bullet, your Kodak moment? What would be that one thing that you would do?
Sure. And this is proof that these are unscripted questions. Hey? Wow. Thank you for that. Whilst I'm scrambling in my head for an answer, can I just mention that I'll share the slides, and there's some material in the slides that people might find useful. So what would I do? I would be speaking to customers and asking them, where are they? What are their stress points? I would be trying to think about I could reposition that is going to distinguish me or separate me from others. And so that's my reference to positioning South Africa as a very, very safe destination, for instance. That's a point that is hard to copy. And then, acknowledging that everyone is in this together. So who else is struggling here? Well, the airlines are struggling. The conferencing businesses are battling. Hotels are battling. Venues are battling. Are there things that we could do as a collective that make us a very, very powerful unit? I would be looking for the collaboration.
And I think one of the key things that you spoke about is that asking those questions, asking the questions to the travelers, asking the questions to the people in the front line, which is very important. Adrian,
really, I know I've spectacularly overshot our scheduled time. I can't help but share this as a very quick example. Piyush Gupta runs a business called DBS, which is the Development Bank of Singapore. He's a good Gupta. And Piyush Gupta, when they run into a business problem, he goes and he gets a customer, a supplier, a couple of employees, and the employees must be different. He wants a 45-year-old, a 53-year-old, and a 27-year-old. And he locks them in a room for 72 hours. He says, here's the problem, solve it.
Thanks. Adrian, thank you very much. I'm aware of the time, and there are some more questions, and I think what we'll do is we'll answer those questions and we'll send it through to the participants within this webinar. But if there's any other additional questions, we'll also share an email address at the end of this, and people can reach out with those questions to that email address. But thank you for your time. I'd like to go into just a quick discussion on the government bonds. What we have, our Executive Head of Credit Risk and Collections, Andrea Seaton, on the line as well, if there's any specific questions relating to government-backed loans. But just for me, I just want to read you this and just some high-level information on these loans for those of the participants that's not aware. So basically, we're all aware that the President announced this together with National Treasury. There's going to be a 200 million rand government-backed loan stimulus package, and the initial phase will be around 100 billion. The key features of the COVID-19 loan guarantee schemes is the following, okay? The COVID-19 loans will be available from banks to eligible businesses in good standing with their commercial banks, registered with SARS and in good standing with SARS. Turnover is unlimited. However, the maximum loan for any company or group of companies is 100 million. Number two, funds borrowed through the scheme can be used for operational expenses such as salaries, rent and lease agreements, contracts with suppliers, etc. Loans will cover up to 3 to 6 months of operational costs and will be drawn down on a monthly basis. Banks are not obliged to extend COVID-19 loans, and those that do will use their normal risk evaluation and credit application process. Business owners may be required to sign surety for these loans. COVID-19 loans will be offered at a single agreed lending rate by all banks participating in the scheme, and this rate will be linked to the repo rate. A 6-month repayment holiday will commence from the last drawdown, although interest will accumulate from the date on which the first drawdown on the loan occurs. Repayment of interest and capital starts after 6 months after the last drawdown, and business have a minimum of 60 months to do so. Borrowers can repay the loan ahead of schedule. Should a business wish to repay the loan before the 60-month term is up, there will be no penalty charges for early settlement. Andrea, is there anything that I've missed from a high-level perspective, just giving some background on the government-backed loan facilities that are available?
Hi, Renier. No, I think you've covered most of it. I do see there is a question from Colin. Has anyone managed to get one? Because you've been working on this for 3 months with Nedbank. Colin, I think every bank is different. The turnaround times have not been great at this point. I know that the work in progress amongst the bank runs into the thousands. So it is a slow process. At Bidvest, we have a process of actually engaging with the customer via Teams meetings to explain exactly the documentation that is required. So we have a one-on-one with the client. The credit manager even joins in with the meeting. So we do put it out there that we try and help you to put it all together as one. It isn't the easiest, and I think a lot of drawbacks were that there was a limited turnover, which they said you couldn't borrow if your turnover was more than 300 million. That has since changed. Added to that, obviously, it became obvious that a lot of businesses were not able to get their audited financials as at February this year together due to the lockdown. That has somewhat eased, and the management accounts would be acceptable. And also they looked specifically to industry types as well. They said as at February, you had to be in good standing. However, we've moved that now to December because we do have a lot of customers that they have the areas of where they peak and when they're down. So that has changed. So there have been a lot of changes to the loan scheme. So phase 2 has started. Unfortunately, I can't speak to Nedbank's turnaround time, but I can just say where we are as Bidvest, who are participating in it and have been approved by the SARB, you can make inquiries to us as well and speak to the guys.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Don't see any more questions on that, but I think, like we said earlier, if there's any questions that still come through, we can address those questions, and I'll leave everybody with an email address at the end of this, and we can address those. But as Andrea has mentioned, this is more than welcome to make contact with us. As Bidvest Bank is part of the loan scheme, we can always see from our side how we would be able to support in applying for these loans. So just to end off, I'd just like to actually say thank you very much to Adrian for making himself available today. As always, Adrian, it was very valuable, very insightful. At the same time, Andrea, also thanks for your time. I know we had limited time towards the end, not a lot of time for questions, but I think there will be questions that will come through later, and we can address those. We'd definitely like to hear from you post this webinar, and should you have any more questions, please send an email to natalia@bigambitions.co.za. I'm just going to repeat that. It's natalia@bigambitions.co.za, and we will be in touch to assist. Thanks to everyone for attending, and back to you, Natalia.
Thanks so much, Renier, and to Dr. Adrian and Andrea for that. I know there will be loads more questions as Colin's in the chat. So if you do have any of those questions, please do feel free to send that through to us. Thank you again for joining us today on a Thursday afternoon. We have recorded and we will release the recording. So we will send that out to everybody so that you have access to it. My thanks to you all for joining us. Have a great afternoon. Goodbye.